Claude projects are what turn Claude AI from a chat window into an admin handoff machine. Chat is great for quick answers, but projects give Claude context. It gives it memory and it allows you to organize similar files together so it can actually keep track of your clients or help you write a proposal or help you put together a project like building a workshop. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to set all of that up in the browser without downloading Cowork or learning a whole new tool. By the way, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss my next training. If you're a consultant or a fractional exec, you probably have more than one client. And so projects can be a great way to keep everything organized and keep your deliverables consistent. So right now, I've just got Claude opened up right in my browser, and I'm just going to go over here and click on the thing that looks like a filing cabinet. It's going to take me to projects. And then I'm going to hit new project. And because what we're talking about is setting up a project for each of our clients, I'm just going to type in a fake client name here. Okay, let's just do Big Co. And then this little box just gives me a, what are you trying to achieve? And so for this, it's going to be an ongoing project. So we can put organize files, we can put draft deliverables, we can put in here research, action items. Okay. It doesn't have to be super specific. And then all you're going to do is go right here and hit create project. So if you've been primarily using Claude in the chat up till now, projects are actually the next natural step because they give you persistent memory and context and a great way to organize all those conversations you've been having with Claude. So instead of going in every time and writing a big long prompt and uploading the files that you want it to reference, it's already going to have a ton of that stuff all set up. And so you can just get right to work. So let's look around here for just a second. When you very first start a new project, you're going to see this memory section right here. And that's a file that Claude is actually going to create for you over time once you've had a few conversations. And this is why projects are so cool, is that they remember what you've been talking about conversation to conversation. And so once it starts to create that file, you can read it and you can also correct it if it's making mistakes or you did something as a one-off and you don't want it to remember that every single time. You actually have control over that file, okay? So the two areas we really want to focus on when we first set up a project are this one right here, which is instructions, and this one right here, which is files. So let's start by just going in here to instructions. I'm just going to hit this plus sign right here. So what we want to do with instructions is put a really specific overview about how you want the project to act every time you interact with it. So this is where we want to tell it the context around the engagement. And at a minimum, I'd include your role, like I'm an independent consultant working with these people to help them do this. So that's where the project deliverables come in, the project cost and the timeline, the client profile. Now here, we're not going to put in all the information about the client, just one or two sentences about what the client's business does. Don't do a lot more because we're going to create a client context file that has a lot more detail and we're going to upload that in the files section. We're going to add just maybe a note about the client's target audience. And then the final thing is you can put any rules or constraints in here. So if the client has a preferred tone or whether they prefer memos or decks, anything that you would like Claude to know and keep in mind every time you open the project. That's what goes in the project instructions. So after we put in our instructions, the next thing we want to do, and this is probably the thing that gives projects its most power, is we want to click this button right here with files. And then in this files space, what we're actually going to do is upload the files that contain all the real detail. This is the context that we want Claude to remember every time we work in the project. And these files are actually the way you train Claude to give it that foundational knowledge. So it's not like the intern's first day at work every single time you use it. And so to upload files, you can just use this button right here and that'll upload them from your computer, or you can just add text directly if there's a link or just something you want it to know, just a comment. You can also add files directly from Canva, from Drive, or from Notion. My list shows that because I have those apps connected using connectors, which I cover in another video. Now, this is important. When you attach files in this section, they don't automatically update. You have to reattach them. So keep that in mind. So these are the files I would upload at a minimum for each client. First one that's like client context, basic client info, stakeholders, decision makers, core products and services, maybe major competitors. Okay. I would put all of that in the context file. The next file is brand guidelines. And the file you upload here is going to have more to do with whether or not you're going to produce files with your brand and send those to the clients, or whether you're actually producing deliverables that are branded with the client's brand. And in that case, you're going to want to put the client's information here. If you have broad brand guidelines and they're already part of your context files, you can actually skip this here. Okay. I would put work history here. I would keep a running bullet style summary of the previous projects you've done with the client, the past deliverables, and whatever the ongoing priorities are. And I would go ahead and update this one after every major milestone. All right. And then finally, I would definitely want to upload the proposal here because that's going to help Claude know what the scope of the project is and what you actually need to deliver. Now, you notice that most of these files here have the .md suffix. That stands for Markdown, and it just means that it strips out most of the formatting. So you can upload doc files or PDFs or a whole lot of different kinds of files here, creating the files in Word or Google Docs anyway. All you have to do is when you go down here to download, you pick this last one, Markdown, and it will download it as a Markdown file. And the reason you'd want to do this is because it's actually cheaper for you because it's easier for Claude to read. So once you've got your project set up for each client, what can you do with it? What kind of things can you hand off? Well, the first one I would recommend is a meeting to action item pipeline. So you could upload transcripts and ask it to extract the action items. You can assign owners to each of those action items. You could have it draft post meeting follow up emails for you. Now, when you're ready to advance to co-work, you can actually have Claude send the emails out after you approve them. But you can do everything else I just said right from your browser. And now you're not cutting and pasting between whatever your note taker is and your to do list and your emails. The next thing that you could try inside a client project folder is competitive analysis. So now that Claude knows your client and your project objectives, you can send it out to do detailed competitive research at the company level or the project level. And then you can ask it to turn that into a report or a memo that you can either share with your client or you can use to inform your own recommendations. Another thing it's great at is it really can speed up client reporting. So as you're working with the client over time, Claude can help you keep track of like the recommendations, the decisions that have been made, the changes that have happened. And then you can use this to not only automatically generate your monthly or your milestone reports, but it's actually going to capture a lot more of the value you delivered. So if you're like me, I usually underreported the value I was adding as a strategy consultant. But Claude, because it has access to all your emails and your meeting notes and your deliverables, it's going to be able to make that a much richer and more detailed presentation. And another thing you might do that maybe you haven't thought of is you could use a Claude project to build a playbook. I did this recently when I was building out priority plans for clients. After I made a few of them, I asked Claude to look at the project history and then create a playbook so I didn't have to think about the steps every single time. Another way to use a playbook as a consultant or a fractional is to use it as a leave behind when you're about to roll off a project. It can be a great way to remind them about the work you did together, and actually, it can help keep you top of mind for referrals. And since Claude has all their info in the project, creating it is just a few prompts away, right? Not a week of like digging up every document, every presentation you made to them during the engagement, and then trying to work through that on your own. So, just the last few tips on using projects for clients before we move on to our next use case. Create one project for each client. So that way you keep their information siloed because projects cannot share information with each other. Okay. Now, in the free version of Claude, you can create up to 5 projects. But if you get on the pro plan for 20 bucks a month, which I highly recommend, your projects are unlimited. And then when you complete an engagement, if you want to archive that project, you just click right here and you go down and you can either archive or delete it. Okay, so those are some ways that Claude can help you deliver results for existing clients. And in talking through that client brain use case, we actually covered how to set up a project, which is the same regardless of what kind of a project you want to set up. So every single time you just hit create new project, you do a little description, and then the two key parts of the foundation are that those instructions, which I'll talk about for every single project, and then the files that you upload. And I'm going to show show you how they can be different depending on what you're trying to do with the project. So our next use case is can we use Claude projects to get us new clients? So let's talk about how to turn it into a proposal writer. So let's just go set up a new project. And this one just going to call proposal writer. All right. And we're just going to say new clients. And we're going to create that project. So in this case, the instructions we put in are going to be more about you. So the way Claude works is that you can set up universal settings. And so maybe that's where you put your brand voice file and your own ICP or ideal client profile files. So these project instructions are in addition to whatever you've got it set up in the universal settings. So for your project instructions for proposals, I would put your role, and there I would define your company's specialty and your exact title. Okay. Then for the process, I would outline the steps Claude should take when you give it the client brief. So maybe it's going to analyze the RFP, or it's going to outline the scope or draft the deliverables. Okay. Then for proposal structure, you can either mandate a standard outline or you can have it follow the RFP if you have one. And then finally, I would put in any formatting constraints that you wanted it to have when it submits the finished product to you. So you can tell it about length, you can put it about format. Do you want it in a PDF? Do you want it in a slide deck? Do you want bullet points? Anything that you want to show up in the finished project, now is a good time to tell Claude about that in the project instructions. And so then the files I would upload for a proposal project would be past winning proposals, right? We want to show Claude what good looks like. So if you have 3 to 5 examples of proposals that you thought were particularly good or ones that were accepted, let's upload those there. And then you might put in like your service and pricing catalog that would include your rates, your service tiers, and your project scopes, just so, Claude doesn't run away with itself. But you don't have to have that file. You could tell it that every time. Okay, so what do we do with the proposal project once we have it set up? Well, first, I would use it to research the stakeholders that were going to be making the decision and then come back with a report. And then I would tell it to use that report to go ahead and draft the proposal based on the foundation that you'd set up in the project instructions. So when you draft the proposal, I talk a lot about creating content with sort of 10% you on the front end, then let Claude do 80%, and then you take the last 10%. But I think with proposals, it's more like 20, 70, 10. And the reason I say that is because you have to give it the information on the client that you're pitching to. But you could drop in their website, any transcripts from the discovery calls you've done with them, anything you want to inform the document and give it an idea about where your brain is heading, and then let Claude take a shot, right? And then once you have the proposal where you want it, you can then use Claude inside the project to reformat the proposal into a pitch deck, maybe, or draft the email that you're going to send out with the proposal attached. And then if it gets accepted, you could actually come back to this and ask Claude to draft the contract or the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, if you use those. And after your proposal gets accepted, you can just move all of these proposal conversations over to your client project if you want Claude to have that backstory as you're going further. So you just do the 3 dots and then go here to change project. And then if I was going to do another proposal within the same project, I might just remove those conversations altogether. So those are your 2 choices when you're done with a conversation in a project that you might use for different clients. So, the 2 use cases we've talked about so far are for ongoing things you do in your business, like managing clients and sending out proposals. But projects are also really useful for managing one time projects in your business, like updating your website or the one I'm going to show you right now, creating a workshop. So, again, we're just going to go here in the browser. We're going to create a new project. I'm going to call this what? Chamber Workshop. And, just workshop deck and notes, and we're just going to create that project. Now, this is important. 5 focused projects beat one overcrowded one every single time. So I don't create a project called workshops. I recommend creating a new project for each workshop. So the same as with the last 2 projects, we always start with project instructions. And so in this case, I'd start with my role, Definitely put in the audience. Clause does a whole lot better if you tell it who it's talking to. So let's say I was giving a workshop for the Chamber of Commerce. I would say my audience is local small business owners that are a mix of brick and mortar and online, multiple industries. Okay. Then a goal, we're creating a 90-minute hands-on workshop where we'll teach people how to use Claude projects to reduce administrative work. Okay. And I'm going to tell it they're actually going to create a working project during the workshop, and then tell it what the output is, outline talking points, Google Slides, and workbook PDF, and then tell it that I want it to use my brand guidelines and my context files for everything that it writes. So when we upload the files we want Claude to reference for our workshop, we don't need to go to the trouble of creating all those markdown files with sort of the ongoing context because workshops tend to be one off kinds of things. So, what I do is I kind of use these file uploads as a brain dump for everything I see that I might like to include in it. So, it's all in one place when I'm ready to, hit the button and go. So, research reports, examples of my past workshops, past workbooks that I've created, like PDF workbooks. If I was going to do it on this topic, I would include a link to this YouTube video. I've also uploaded screenshots. I showed you at the beginning where you could just put in text. So, like notes or ideas that you have along the way. These projects are a great way to compile all of that in one place and then have AI help you organize and sort through those ideas. Claude is really good at that. So, when it comes down to the actual handoff, what can you ask Claude to do? Well, you could do what I just said. Ask it to organize the notes into an outline. This is another point where I would use sort of the 10-80-10, right? 10% you saying, this is the direction I think I want to go with this workshop. And then 80% Claude doing the heavy lifting. And then 10% of you polishing up and making it human, right? You could ask it to create your talking points. You could ask it to create text and images for the deck and actually create the deck if you've got your connectors on to Canva or to Gamma. You could have it draft the workbook and you could have it even format and create the workbook again if you've got your connectors set up to Canva or to Google Docs or to Gamma. Okay, so far we've talked about how to set up a project and then three different use cases. One to build client brain with a project for each of your clients, one to use it to help you write proposals, and another to set up a workshop wizard to help you create a presentation and all the collateral that you would need for a workshop. So, the last piece of this is how do you know when you should go to the trouble to create a project versus just keep chatting in the chat? Well, number one, if you keep having to re explain what you're working on every day. Number two, if Claude keeps losing the thread because there's too many moving parts, right? You're uploading a bunch of files, you've got multiple client projects going on, it gets confused between them. When you have multiple deliverables, that's a good example of having too many moving parts. And finally, if it would be helpful to keep all the files and notes and drafts together, like in the case of the workshop planner, because again, you can have Claude help you make sense of a whole lot of different ideas that you've had going on. So, other use cases for Claude projects that we didn't explore today: market research, setting up a content system, data analysis. These are all great candidates for projects. And your best bet is to just pick a topic, pick a client or a couple of clients, pick a proposal you're working on or a workshop you're working on, and follow the steps we talked about today and just start using it. So, a few times today, I mentioned how you can make projects even more powerful with Claude connectors, but I didn't really dive into how those work. So, if you want to learn more about that, this is the video you want to watch next.